Ever wonder why a man will spend hours replaying a 5-minute conversation with one woman in his mind, while completely forgetting another who spent 2 hours trying to impress him? Picture this scene. You're sitting in a coffee shop. There's an attractive guy at the table next to you. Most women would attempt to appear flawless, flash their most charming smile, say all the right things. Yet according to Sigmund Freud's groundbreaking discoveries about the human unconscious, this approach is precisely why they end up being forgotten. Freud revealed that our minds are driven by hidden impulses, repressed longings, and unconscious patterns. What truly captivates us isn't found in the obvious, but rather in what remains hinted at, incomplete, or just slightly out of reach. The most powerful attraction doesn't come from perfection, but from subtle psychological triggers that speak directly to his unconscious mind. In the following 6 principles, you'll discover how to harness these hidden mechanisms of human psychology, not through manipulation, but by understanding the deepest truths about attraction and human connection. If you're ready to uncover secrets that no relationship guide has ever revealed, let's dive in. The first principle that keeps men awake all night is so subtle that most women completely miss it. The art of suggesting the forbidden without ever speaking it directly. Imagine this scenario. You're having a conversation with a man about completely ordinary topics: work, weather, that new restaurant down the street. Suddenly, you lean in slightly closer and say with a barely noticeable smile, "You know, I have a theory about people that I normally never tell anyone." Then you lean back and change the subject. What happens in his mind? His unconscious immediately starts working. Freud recognized as early as 1900 that our mind becomes fascinated by what appears forbidden or hidden. He called this the dynamic of repression. The more something is kept from consciousness, the stronger the unconscious preoccupation becomes. When you hint at something and then pull back, you create a psychological gap. His mind cannot help but fill that gap. The brilliance of this principle doesn't lie in the provocation itself, but in the restraint. You open a door just a crack, then close it again. The unconscious interprets this as a secret waiting to be discovered. Freud would say you're activating his curiosity drives while simultaneously triggering his conquest fantasies. Here's the crucial point. It must be authentic. The unconscious recognizes fakeness immediately. If you mention a mysterious theory, you should actually have one. Perhaps an observation about human behavior that genuinely intrigues you. Maybe a personal philosophy you've developed. The power lies not in invention, but in selective revelation of real thoughts. Another example. You're talking about a book you're currently reading and add, "It's completely changed how I view relationships. Some insights are so intense that I could only share them with someone who truly understands." Again, you lean back. Again, you create that psychological gap. What happens neurobiologically? His dopamine system activates. Dopamine isn't just released during rewards, but especially during the anticipation of rewards. You've created an expectation without making a promise. Freud would have put it differently. You've directed his libido, his psychic energy, toward you without satisfying it. The forbidden doesn't have to be sexual. It can be intellectually forbidden, a thought I normally keep to myself, emotionally forbidden, a feeling I rarely confess to anyone, or socially forbidden, an opinion that's unpopular, but one I still hold. The art lies in timing. Applied too early, it seems manipulative. Too late, and the moment is lost. The perfect timing is when a basic connection has already formed, but before deeper intimacy has set in. It's the window between interest and intimacy. Freud taught us that the unconscious thinks in symbols and suggestions, not direct statements. When you say, "I find you attractive," his conscious mind processes this information rationally. But when you hint that you have secrets that only a special person could understand, you're speaking directly to his unconscious. A warning sign. If you find yourself constantly applying this principle without ever actually revealing anything, it becomes manipulation. The unconscious recognizes that too. Authenticity means occasionally actually sharing the secret with the right person at the right time. Have you ever noticed how your own thoughts circle around someone who has only given you hints? That's your own unconscious at work. But as powerful as this first principle is, the second is even more subtle. It uses the power of what isn't said to create an even deeper psychological effect. Because sometimes what we don't say is louder than any words. The second principle is so powerful that it will occupy his thoughts hours later. The art of incomplete thoughts and strategic pauses. Imagine you're in the middle of a flowing conversation with him. He's telling you about his future plans. You're listening attentively. Suddenly you look at him differently, not flirtatiously, not judgmentally, but thoughtfully. You open your mouth as if to say something, close it again, and just smile slightly. "What is it?" he'll ask. You respond, "Oh, just a thought. It's not important." And then you elegantly change the subject. What have you just done? You've activated the most powerful psychological tool Freud ever discovered: projection. Freud recognized that our unconscious constantly tries to complete incomplete information. When you hint at a thought and don't follow through, his mind automatically takes over the work. He begins to project, meaning he fills the gap with his own desires, fantasies, and hopes. The genius of it, he doesn't know he's projecting. His consciousness believes he's thinking about you, when actually he's thinking about his own idealized version of what you might have thought. He's not just falling for you, but also for his own projections onto you. A practical example, he raves about his favorite book. You say, "That's interesting. That tells me something about you." Then you pause as if studying him and add, "But I shouldn't jump to conclusions." His curiosity is sparked. What did you recognize? What conclusions? His unconscious immediately begins filling in the missing information, and it does so with positive assumptions about himself. Freud taught us that people are drawn to what stimulates their imagination. Direct compliments activate consciousness and are processed rationally. Incomplete thoughts activate the unconscious and are processed emotionally. And emotional processing is always stronger than rational processing. The power lies in the timing of the pause. Pauses that are too short seem like slips of the tongue. Pauses that are too long become uncomfortable. The perfect pause lasts about 2 to 3 seconds, long enough for his unconscious to register something's missing here, but short enough to seem natural. Another variation, you're telling a story about yourself, reach an exciting point and say, "But that would go too far now." His mind can't help but finish the story. He'll develop scenarios that are often more romantic and exciting than reality could ever be. Here's an important objection. Isn't this manipulative? Freud would answer, all communication is unconscious manipulation. The difference lies in the intention. If you use incomplete thoughts to create a genuine connection, it's authentic. If you do it to deceive someone, it's manipulation. The unconscious distinguishes between both intentions surprisingly well. When your incomplete thoughts are based on real observations and feelings, they seem magnetic. When they're invented, they seem hollow. A common mistake, women think they need to be mysterious or enigmatic. That's not the same thing. Being enigmatic means intentionally communicating confusingly. Using incomplete thoughts means communicating selectively and thoughtfully. The neurological explanation: incomplete information activates the brain's reward system more strongly than complete information. This is due to the so-called Zeigarnik effect. Our brain remembers unfinished tasks better than finished ones. Your incomplete thought becomes an unfinished task in his mind. Freud called this psychic tension. This tension isn't unpleasant, it's exciting. It creates an emotional charge between you both that persists even after the conversation. A practical tip: practice this initially in unimportant conversations. Tell a friend a story and deliberately leave out details. Observe how she follows up. That's the same psychological dynamic, just without romantic context. Do you recognize how your own thinking reacts to incomplete information? When someone says, "You remind me of someone," but doesn't continue, doesn't that occupy you too? The third principle goes even further. It doesn't use what you hide, but what you consciously show, but in a way that reaches his heart before his mind even understands what has happened. The third principle breaks all the rules of modern dating, and that's precisely why it's so powerful. The conscious revelation of genuine but carefully measured vulnerability. Picture this. The conversation is running superficially. Hobbies, travel, the usual topics. Suddenly, he becomes quieter, more thoughtful. You notice it and say softly, "You know, sometimes I wonder if I expect too much from others or too little from myself." A brief pause. Then you look him in the eyes and smile again. "Sorry, sometimes I think out loud." What just happened? You've activated one of the most powerful unconscious dynamics Freud ever described: transference and countertransference. Freud discovered that people unconsciously transfer their deepest emotional patterns onto others. When you show genuine vulnerability, men transfer their protective instincts onto you, not because you seem weak, but because you seem human. At the same time, countertransference occurs. Your authenticity encourages him to be authentic as well. The crucial word is measured. Vulnerability is like precious perfume. One drop seduces, a whole bottle frightens. You share a moment of genuine self-reflection, but not traumatic life stories. You show depth, but not neediness. Another example, he proudly tells you about a professional success. Most women would praise him or mention their own successes, but you say, "That sounds fulfilling. I sometimes think success means something different to everyone. For me, it's still a puzzle." This honest uncertainty doesn't make you weaker, it makes you real. Freud recognized that we're drawn to what creates resonance in us. Perfect people generate admiration, but no emotional resonance. Vulnerable people, however, activate our mirror neuron system. We empathize with them. We understand them on a deep, unconscious level. Neurobiology confirms Freud's intuition. Vulnerability activates the oxytocin system, the bonding hormone. When you share a genuine insecurity, his brain releases oxytocin. He feels closer to you without understanding why. But here lies the danger. False vulnerability is immediately recognized by the unconscious. If you pretend to have weaknesses you don't have, or dramatize problems that aren't real, it seems manipulative. Genuine vulnerability arises from real questions you ask yourself. The art lies in balance. You show that you think, doubt, grow, but not that you're broken. You're a human with facets, not a project that needs to be saved. Freud would say, you activate his nurturing drive, not his rescue complex. A practical framework: share processes, not problems. Instead of, "I'm bad at relationships," say, "I'm still learning how closeness and independence fit together." Instead of, "I have trust issues," say, "Trust is something that takes time for me." The timing rule: vulnerability works best when a basic connection already exists, but before intimacy has developed. It's the moment between interested and familiar, the window where emotions are most receptive. Freud also taught that vulnerability is contagious. When you share a moment of genuine uncertainty, he's unconsciously encouraged to do the same. An emotional dance emerges. You open up slightly, he opens up slightly. You both become more real and connected. An important point: authentic vulnerability is never self-pitying. It's thoughtful, not whining. It shows that you're a person who reflects on life, not someone overwhelmed by it. The most common question: but what if he uses my vulnerability against me? Freud had a clear answer. People who exploit vulnerability are themselves hurt and incapable of relationships. Your authentic vulnerability is a natural filter. It attracts emotionally healthy men and scares off toxic ones. Have you ever noticed that you're drawn to people who speak honestly about their doubts? That's your unconscious responding to authenticity. But as powerful as genuine vulnerability is, the fourth principle works even more subtly. It uses attention itself as a tool, but not the way you think. Sometimes the strongest way to be present is to remain almost invisible. The fourth principle is so counterintuitive that it completely contradicts most women, and that's precisely why it works. The art of indirect attention. Imagine this situation. You're with him and other people. While everyone tries to win his attention, you do something else. You notice that the elderly lady at the next table is struggling with her heavy bag and discreetly help her. Or you have an intense conversation with his best friend about a topic that genuinely interests you. You don't ignore him, but you don't orbit around him either. What happens in his unconscious? Freud called it libidinal investment through absence. When everyone else is fighting for his attention, but you're authentically occupied elsewhere, he becomes unconsciously magnetically drawn to you. This is due to a fundamental principle of human psychology. We desire what doesn't completely belong to us. When you give him indirect attention, perceiving him but not courting him, you activate his conquest instinct without triggering his defense mechanisms. A concrete example, he's telling a story to the group. Instead of adoring him like everyone else, you listen attentively, but your gaze occasionally wanders. You smile at his punchline, but not excessively. Then you turn to the waiter and order for yourself, without asking what he'd like. This tiny gesture of independence is immediately registered by his unconscious. Freud recognized that the unconscious permanently searches for clues about who is available and who isn't. Direct attention signals availability. Indirect attention signals interest without neediness, a psychologically irresistible combination. The genius of it, you don't have to pretend to be disinterested. You're authentically interested in other things. You have your own life, your own thoughts, your own priorities. That's not an act, that's personality. The neurological explanation, his dopamine system reacts more strongly to unpredictable rewards than to constant ones. If you continuously give him attention, his brain gets used to it. If you occasionally give him intense attention and then live your own life again, his reward system stays activated. A common mistake. Women confuse indirect attention with games. These are two completely different things. Games are calculated and manipulative. Indirect attention is authentic and respectful. You're not intentionally ignoring him. You simply have other interests too. The practice. When he's in a group situation, divide your attention. Have genuine conversations with others. Show interest in different people and topics. Be the person who enriches the social fabric, not the one fixated on just one person. Freud also taught us that people desire what psychologically challenges them. If you're completely available, there's no challenge. If you're partially available, interested but independent, you create healthy tension. An important point. This attention distribution must be natural. It arises from genuine interests and genuine social intelligence, not from strategy. If you're normally shy and suddenly charm everyone, it seems inauthentic. The time rule: give him about 60 to 70% of your attention and the rest of the world 30 to 40%. That's enough to show interest, but not so much that you seem intrusive. Freud also recognized that indirect attention signals respect. You respect his autonomy by maintaining your own. You show that you see him as an important, but not the only important person in your life. The paradoxical effect: the more you live your own life, the more interesting you become to him. The more authentically you interact with others, the more he wants to be part of your life. It's as if you're showing him, "This is how vibrant and interesting I am. Would you like to get to know this better?" Have you ever noticed that you're drawn to people who don't constantly seek your validation? That's the same psychological dynamic. But the fifth principle taps into an even deeper human longing. It works with our most fundamental need, the desire to be understood and mirrored. And it does so in a way that reaches his heart before his mind even notices what's happening. The fifth principle touches the deepest longing of the human soul, and most people don't even recognize when it's being applied: the subtle art of emotional echo. Imagine he's enthusiastically telling you about his new project. While he speaks, you notice his voice changes, it becomes more animated. His eyes light up. Instead of just nodding or praising, you unconsciously mirror his energy. Your own voice becomes a nuance more lively. You lean slightly forward. Your eyes get the same interested gleam. Then you say, "You can tell how much this fulfills you." You haven't mirrored his words, but his emotional essence. What just happened? You've activated one of the most powerful unconscious dynamics Freud ever described: psychological mirroring and narcissistic identification. Freud discovered that people are drawn to those in whom they recognize themselves. But it's not about superficial mimicry, it's about emotional resonance. When you subtly reflect his feelings, his unconscious gets the impression, "This person understands me on a deep level." The genius of emotional echo lies in its invisibility. He doesn't consciously notice that you're mirroring him. He just feels an inexplicable connection, a sense of being understood. Freud called this narcissistic validation, not in a negative sense, but as a fundamental human need to see oneself reflected in others. Another example: he becomes thoughtful and speaks about his uncertainties regarding an important decision. His body language becomes calmer, his voice deeper. You mirror this energy. Also become calmer. Your voice becomes softer. Then you say something like, "That sounds like a decision that deserves careful consideration." You haven't just heard his words, but captured and reflected his emotional state. Neurobiology confirms Freud's intuition. Mirror neurons in our brain fire both when we experience an emotion and when we observe the same emotion in others. When you subtly mirror his emotions, you activate his mirror neurons and create neurobiological synchronicity. But here lies the art. It must happen authentically. Mechanical mirroring seems creepy. Genuine emotional echo occurs when you actually empathically tune in to his emotional state. You must truly feel what he feels, not pretend what he feels. The 3 levels of emotional echo. First, energetic mirroring. You adjust your basic energy to his. Second, tonal mirroring. Your voice harmonizes with his emotional coloring. Third, content mirroring. You pick up not just his words, but the emotion behind them. A practical example: he's excited about a success. Bad mirroring would be getting just as excited. Good mirroring is capturing his joy and reflecting it in your own way, perhaps through a warm smile and the words, "That's really something special, isn't it?" Freud taught us that people unconsciously search for emotional twins, not copies of themselves, but people who speak their emotional language. When you speak this language fluently, a deep, unconscious connection emerges. The timing rule: emotional echo works best in quiet, more intimate moments. In loud social situations, it's hard to practice and can seem inauthentic. Wait for the quiet undertones of conversation. A common mistake: women think they always have to mirror positively. That's wrong. If he's thoughtful or even slightly melancholic, mirror that mood, not to bring him down, but to show him that you accept all his emotional facets. Freud also recognized that emotional echo builds trust. When someone feels their emotions are understood and respected, they open up further. A positive spiral of emotional intimacy emerges. The danger: don't lose yourself in the process. Emotional echo doesn't mean adapting to the point of self-denial. It means being empathetic while remaining authentic. You mirror his emotions, but you keep your personality. Have you ever met someone with whom you immediately felt understood, without knowing why? You probably met someone who mastered natural emotional echo. But as powerful as these 5 principles are, the 6th is the most paradoxical of all. It uses our deepest psychological contradiction. The more we can have something, the less we want it. And the less available it is, the more desirable it becomes. The sixth and most powerful principle contradicts everything modern relationship guides preach, and that's precisely why it's irresistible: the psychological force of elegant unavailability. Imagine, the conversation is going perfectly. The chemistry is right, he's obviously interested. His body language shows attraction, his questions become more personal. At this moment, almost every woman makes the same mistake. She becomes completely available. She shows she has time, that he has priority, that she's ready for the next step. But what if instead you glance at your watch and say, "I'm sorry, but I really have to go. That was unexpectedly lovely." And then you actually leave. What have you just activated? Freud's most fundamental insight about human motivation, the tension between pleasure principle and reality principle. Freud discovered that our unconscious is driven by two contradictory forces. The pleasure principle wants immediate gratification. He wants to get to know you better, wants to spend more time with you. The reality principle, however, recognizes that the most valuable things require time and effort. If you're easily available, you signal to his unconscious low value. If you're elegantly unavailable, you signal high value. The paradox: you're not playing hard to get, you are hard to get. There's a difference between artificial scarcity and authentic abundance. You have a life fulfilling enough that you don't depend on a man to feel complete. A concrete example: he invites you to dinner the same evening. Most women would drop everything, but you respond, "That's very sweet, but I already have plans." How about next week? Not from calculation, but because you really do have plans, with friends, with yourself, with your life. Freud taught us that people desire what psychologically challenges them. If something is too easy to have, it loses its appeal. This is due to the so-called Zeigarnik effect. Our brain is more intensely occupied with incomplete experiences than with completed ones. Neurobiology confirms this. Uncertainty activates the reward system more strongly than certainty. If he knows you're immediately available, his dopamine system relaxes. If he's not quite sure when he'll see you again, it stays active. But here's the crucial point: elegant unavailability is never cold or dismissive. It's warm but busy, interested but not needy. You're not saying no to him, you're saying yes to your life and inviting him to be part of it rather than the center of it. A practical framework: the 70% rule. Be 70% available and 30% busy with other aspects of your life. That's enough interest to create connection, but enough mystery to maintain tension. Freud also recognized that unavailability stimulates imagination. When you're not immediately available, his mind begins developing scenarios. What are you doing? Who are you with? These fantasies are often more exciting than reality, and that's the point, the most common fear. But what if he loses interest? Freud's answer would be clear: a man who loses interest just because you have your own life isn't the right one. Elegant unavailability is a natural filter. It attracts confident, patient men and scares off insecure, controlling ones. The art lies in the balancing act: too available, and you lose his attention. Too unavailable, and you lose his hope. The perfect zone lies in between, interested and interesting simultaneously. An important distinction: unavailability from abundance versus unavailability from fear. When you're busy because your life is rich and fulfilling, you radiate attractiveness. When you're busy to manipulate him, you radiate calculation. Freud finally taught us that the strongest attraction occurs when someone appears both reachable and unreachable. You're emotionally reachable, warm, open, empathetic, but you're practically selective. Your time and energy are valuable and thoughtfully invested. The paradoxical truth: the more you live your own life, the more he wants to be part of it. The less you need him, the more he wants to be needed. The more complete you are without him, the more complementarity you can offer him. Have you noticed that the people who fascinate you most are often those who remain a bit beyond your reach? These 6 principles together create a psychological symphony that speaks directly to his unconscious. And that's exactly why he'll think about you all night long. These principles work because they don't manipulate, they reveal. They don't force anyone to like you. You simply become the woman who's impossible to forget. The crucial question isn't, how can I make him think about me? The real question is, what hidden aspects of my personality am I still waiting to discover, to become the woman one cannot stop thinking about? Comment below which country you're watching from. I'm curious about our international community. If this video has given you new insights, leave a like and subscribe for more psychological secrets. Share it with someone who should understand these principles. Thank you for being part of this journey into the depths of human psychology.